Now, investors may be reading the prospect of a government shutting down and saying no big deal if you do, because you can't spend any more money if you're closed. To Wyoming Republican Senator John Barrasso. Senator, I guess they have a point in that regard, but where does this thing stand?
Well, Neil, at this point, the government is going to stay open. We have a two-week extension. The vice president's coming to Capitol Hill to talk about the ways to continue to reduce the spending. That's the message that we heard from the American people on Election Day. The $4 billion that was cut by the vote yesterday in the Senate is just a start. If we can't eat the whole loaf at once, we have to go a slice at a time, and that's what we're prepared to do.
All right, you're looking next to the senator in the shot there. I know you can't see it, Senator, but where the vice president might be arriving. Remember, in his capacity as president of the Senate, he is an instrumental role here, and he is, of course, the administration's liaison in trying to get this thing settled. The White House senator was indicating that it would meet you Republicans halfway on these spending cuts, not with exact numbers, but with something like $6 billion worth of additional cuts that would total $44.8 billion of total cuts. I don't know how they arrived at that math, sir, but is that a step in the right direction and a way to avoid a shutdown period?
A very baby step in the right direction, Neil. We're at a point in this country.
By the way, the vice president is there meeting with some of the leadership, and I see the chief of staff Daley is there as well. But go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Well, this country is going to spend $3.7 trillion this year, only take in $2.2 trillion. Neil, the interest alone on the so-called stimulus package is $100 million a day. So these amounts that the White House is talking about are so insignificant in terms of the bigger problem. And, you know, as Warren Buffett talked about just this past weekend, we're going to be looking at inflation. That's going to increase the cost of the interest on the debt. It's going to make it that much harder for us to create jobs in this country. And that's what the focus ought to be, jobs in the economy. And by the president offering so little, so late, that's going to make it harder and more expensive to create private sector jobs in the country. I want to find ways to make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs.
Nevertheless, if he's making those kind of overtures now, and you still have 2 weeks to go, not that that's a lot of time, as you said, and you're making progress on moving those numbers, would you be open to, I guess, this idea of another 2-week extension to keep the government limping along a little longer to dot the I's and cross the T's?
I would be willing to do that as long as it's the similar number that's about $2 billion every week. You know, these discussions should have happened 2 years ago, Neil.
I'm sorry, Senator, what does the $2 billion every week mean?
Well, we just did a 2-week extension to keep the government open by cutting $4 billion.
Okay.
So if they go another 2 weeks by cutting another $4 billion, if I'm finding $2 billion in cuts each and every week, then that gets to the $61 billion that the House has come up with. But I think we need to get to that number.
Okay, but you'd be open to that 2 weeks from now if that's the kind of direction you're going in? Because some of your more conservative members, I was talking to your colleague Rand Paul of Kentucky yesterday, who voted against this 2-week extension. He would be not at all predisposed to voting for anything like this unless the numbers were starkly bigger.
Well, I want to get to those bigger numbers because our problem in this country is we spend too much. We've continued to spend too much, and 41 cents of every dollar we're spending, Neil, is now borrowed from other folks, much of it from overseas. That is a real concern for our future security. And whether we eat this loaf one slice at a time or the whole loaf at once, we need to consume the entire loaf.
All right. I do appreciate the food analogies, Senator. Thank you very much. John Barrasso, good seeing you again.
Good to see you. Thanks, Neil.